I'm Susan Merel. I'm in GIM in hospital medicine and palliative care. And the hat that I'm probably most wearing when I do this talk is I'm an associate clerkship director of medicine student programs. And the topic today is how to write a great letter of recommendation for a learner, for a colleague, or for yourself in limited circumstances. So our learning objectives are to use a standardized process to write letters of recommendation for others, to inspect and revise your letters to reduce unconscious bias, and to write strong letters for yourself. So in the first section, I'm going to talk about letters for students and other trainees. I'm focusing on students because that's what I do most of, and maybe what you in this group do most of, but I think the rules apply pretty uniformly also to letters for other trainees. So if you'll humor me for a minute, that picture on the right, that's my son, Sam. That's my son, Sam. The one on the left is him when he was about 11, and the other one is him now. He's coming home from his first year of college. And I thought this was a really good letter of recommendation that was not for a medical student, but was for Sam. And you can judge my parenting if you will. It used to be a standard and allowed thing that you could appeal the decision to put your kid in the Seattle Public Schools gifted program. And so we asked Sam's math teacher for 4th or 5th grade to write a letter in support of Sam going into a more advanced math class. So I'm hoping that you guys can read that letter. It's not very long because he was only 11. And that you can either unmute or put in the chat, why did I use this as an example? What are some characteristics of this letter that you could generalize to letters about medical students? What's good about this letter? Not what's good about Sam. Sam's awesome, but what's good about this letter? Any thoughts? Welcome those of you who joined out late. This was a letter from my son, and I'm asking what are the characteristics of a good letter for a medical student that you actually see in this letter? Oh, great. Okay. Background on the teacher's experience or the letter writer, right? The letter writer tells you who she is. The word we use for that sometimes is credible. It's a credible letter. This person knows about math kids, right? So that she makes that super clear from the beginning. Great. It is, and then Shom describes how he is amazing related to objective measures. It is, and actually related to other people, right? It's comparative. And probably you could say contextual. Anything else that anybody notice? Okay. So I have 5 C's that I will give you in a moment, and I think that this fits the 5 C's for an excellent letter of recommendation. It's concise. It's easier to be concise for an 11-year-old than for a medical student. It is credible. You know who Miss Mills is, sorry, who the teacher is, and it's contextual. You know what the math class is that Sam was in. It's concrete, objective. Here's what he can do, and here's how he compares to other folks. Okay. So I like this rubric. It's not mine. It's Chris Knight and Ken Steinberg's, if you know them. And I added in a C because Sam is now in Cleveland, and that's the new baseball team there. But the 5 C's are concise, credible, telling the reader who you are, contextual, the setting and the amount of contact. And some people like to add the amount of autonomy that students have in your institution. It's concrete, it's specific, and for a medical student, it should have brief anecdotes. And then sometimes comparative. This one was comparative, and we write a lot more letters for medical students than that teacher does for 4th graders, and it probably doesn't behoove the students that we always put a comparative in, but sometimes a comparative can be really helpful. So I'm going to walk you through 4 steps in writing a letter of recommendation. The first one is making sure you're the right person to do it. The second one is just a mental exercise. How competitive is this student compared to others? The third one is write the letter. And the fourth is double check for bias. So on number 1, you want to just make sure you are the right letter who can write a relatively strong letter for this student. And the students are coached about this, and most will say, can you write a strong letter, not just can you write a letter. But whether or not they do that, if this is a student who struggled, I don't really hesitate with any kind of high pass or interpreter level and above student, especially if they had a lot of great strengths. I can write a strong enough letter, even if the person wasn't like the best ever. But I really will have a conversation with the student if they really were struggling. That's usually not an email conversation. That's a phone call or an in-person conversation if you're still rotating with them. And sometimes you are the best person to write the letter, right? Sometimes they've struggled throughout and they've improved a lot with you, and you can say that. And sometimes you are the best person. If you can't tell after a conversation with the student, for a medical student, you can refer them to us in medicine student programs, and we can help with that. We have access to their letters of recommendation, to their comments, and we can sometimes look at the comments and say, oh, maybe that person can write you a stronger letter. All right, any questions? Next step, how competitive is the student? And again, this is just a mental exercise. And I would do this like when I write a letter for somebody applying to palliative care fellowship or geriatrics fellowship, I can kind of go through that. So if Shom was asked to write a letter for hospital medicine fellowship, I think he could probably say, is this the strongest candidate ever? And again, if you don't know because they're asking you to write a letter for another kind of fellowship, then I would really just call somebody up. But I categorize the students in my mind as like the top few ever. They blew me away. They could be my doctor tomorrow. Other really strong students that fit what we call the manager criteria or honor students in our system, where they are looking pretty close to an intern. They need more supervision than an intern, but at the 4th year level, especially, they're pretty close to an intern. That's a strong student. Somebody who's an interpreter student cannot all the way give you a good plan all the time. And then the last category is anyone that I have some doubts about, because by the time you're a 4th year student, you really should be better than passing a medicine clerkship, or anybody with any professionalism concerns. And then you draft the letter, and I'm going to go through like the parts of the letter. So overall, pretty simple structure from a writing perspective. It has an introduction, it has an opening statement with an appropriate adjective. You describe yourself and the context. The body describes the student's strengths, being as generous and specific as possible. And it's really helpful to include some brief anecdotes, not like the long stories that the students put in their personal statement, but just like a sentence. He did this thing with the patient. She did this thing with the team. And then a conclusion A lot of people will skim the letter and look for certain words in the conclusion, so then recapping their strengths in the conclusion. So here's the opening sentence. For any strong student, I say, and I don't know if these are like the exact same words that everybody uses across the country. I feel pretty sure that I'm using the generally right code words here. There are probably other words that would work, but feel free to use these. For honor students, I'm pleased to write the strongest possible letter of support. You can like get even more fancy for your like top 3 students. I'm overjoyed to write the very strongest possible letter of support. I wouldn't sweat it if you don't. For those students, you're gonna put a comparison probably, and you're gonna be very effusive. And some of you, so one of you is writing his first letter. Maybe if you haven't like worked with that many students, you can't really like honestly say this is the best student I ever worked with if there's only a few. For a high pass student, a letter of strong support, and then for a pass student, letter of support. So that's the opening sentence. And then I describe my role. And if you're not brand new, and I don't have like an exact number, but if you're not brand new, I would say something in there about how much experience I have, and my sample is there, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. And then I think it's really important in our settings to describe the complexity of the teaching setting and how closely we work with the students. Yes, and yes, we can send out the slides for reference. I'm going to take some of the samples out, but I can send out the slides, and it's recorded. It's going to be recorded also. So you see there in that sample that the student was great. It was the strongest possible support, and I talk about who I am and how long I've been doing this. I just say many. I mean, some people will like be counting and keep track, but I just say many. And then I talk about the complexity of the setting, and this was a student during early COVID. For those of you who work on the hospital medicine service or in any other setting where you work really closely with the student, I would say that like we like really are with the students all day on our hospital medicine service. And I think it's important for people reading the letter to know that. And then I actually haven't been doing this, but I'm going to start. Dr. Powell does this in his letters, and I just was listening to something that he recorded about this, that he talks about the amount of autonomy that we expect from our students on our medicine rotations, because other schools don't actually give their students as much autonomy as we do. So I think that's something to consider as well. And then the body of the letter is just a specific description of the student's strengths, talking about competency related behaviors. What did they do? What did they show you? And as appropriate, you don't want to be effusive about every single student, because then it's not going to mean anything. But appropriately, you want to use standout adjectives, and I'll talk about what those are. And we don't want to comment on personal characteristics. I used to see a lot of letters that say always had a smile on her face, and it was usually about a woman. And her face is not the issue. So what are you trying to say? Maybe you're trying to say that she had a really positive attitude that was appreciated by the team. But think about what is it that she did rather than like who she is. If the student's not applying in internal medicine, try your best to kind of highlight some skills that are relevant to that specialty. And usually it's easy because usually students have known often they've shown some aptitude. So they're applying in ophthalmology and they were really good with procedures, or they're applying in psychiatry and they were really engaged in counseling the patients. And then I don't always do this, but it's nice to briefly describe other aspects of the student's experience if they are truly unique and relevant. So they have a big application. There's a lot of other stuff in there, but like if there's some stuff, if the student is really set on an academic career and they've done some really interesting and relevant stuff to that, or they have a lot of teaching experience and they're really interested in teaching, I will put that in there. And then I give a comparative if it would be helpful, if it would help the student, and if I have enough experience to do so. Any questions about the body of the letter? All right. Here's some samples. Both of these are really good. The second one is I already changed the name, so that's why it's not blacked out. So in the first one, I specifically called out some skills, and I gave the example of how she worked with a particular patient, and then another example about her educational attitude. I wrote both of these letters a couple of years back, and I probably could have been a little more concise, but you get the idea. And then the second one also giving a lot of specific examples. One more, and this one, it's showing some other parts of it. I'm explaining the concept or the context in the same part. I thought that his communication skills were really important, and so I gave an example of that. And then this is somebody who really was quite set on a particular kind of academic career, and I wanted to highlight that for him. So here we get into kind of the informal code that's out there. The top academic programs are looking for these kinds of words from you, and so you should only use them if you feel them in your heart, right? But if this student really was outstanding, amazing, extraordinary, superb, fantastic, you should say that. Shom, did I miss any words? Any superlatives that you reach for?
No, I think this is a good list.
Okay. The other thing is, then really I mentioned these words earlier. These are just kind of understood as codes for quartiles. And it's hard to do the mental exercise, especially if you've been working as a doctor in academics for a while. Is this person top 25%, middle, right? But generally, outstanding is somebody who's at least in the top 25%. And the reason why these are sort of understood this way is that these are the words used in the MSPE, or Medical Student Performance Evaluation, that used to be called the Dean's Letter, that's generated separately through the Dean's office. And so those are the quartile words, and those are used elsewhere in academic medicine. And I as far as I know, because I'm not a fellowship director, but people across all levels in fellowships and evaluating faculty, I think they have the same understanding of these words, that excellent is not as good as outstanding. Language to avoid. Avoid, if they are a strong student, if they are a high pass student or above, don't make them sound average. I mean, we can debate philosophically about how that is, right? But these letters are to be generous again. And so we don't want to say that they are average. We generally don't want to say that they're improved, which is a little weird because we actually, even the best of us, improve all the time. So the more generous code for that is that they had an outstanding educational attitude. So growth mindset, I like that. So you could say that they have a growth mindset, and you can say that they had an outstanding educational attitude and give an example of how they learned something or taught something to the team. That's great. And then it's fine to say that somebody's a hard worker or reliable, but those are sometimes used kind of as code for something nice to say about somebody where you can't say other nice things. So if there is sometimes there is just a really example of students being so persistent and hardworking, they really like did their best to chase down this important piece of information that really changed the patient care, I would just explain that, right? Here's an example of something that they did that helped the patient, rather than say they worked really hard. So that was the body. And now we're at the conclusion. And unfortunately, because I really love those anecdotes that I put in the middle, hopefully people read some of those, but they definitely read the conclusion. And so you want to recap their strengths and what sets them apart. And if you want them in our residency, I would say that, or they would make it a great internist, but I'm pleased that they've decided to join the specialty of psychiatry. Then the comparative, if you're going to use it, can go there. Looking back at some old letters that I've written, I put my comparative in different places and sometimes put it more than once. So hopefully that's not bad, or it wasn't bad in the past, but it's good for it to be at the end. And sometimes I'll put it at the beginning, and maybe going forward, I'll put it in both places. So here's two examples. So I described his strength. I said this was a long time ago, I said he had the soul of an internist. I hope everybody got what I meant. He really did have the soul of an internist. I said he's among the very best few third-year medical students with whom I worked in my career. I would be overjoyed. And then I don't know why I didn't use a comparative in the second one, but I would be happy to have her care for a family member, and I know she'll be a superstar in any residency program. So moving on, what if you have to write a letter for a student who is who actually struggled, right? So again, confirm you're the right person. It is okay to comment on improvement and work ethic, because that's really important. That many of these students who who had challenges in our clerkship will go on to be really good doctors. And they have to improve in order to do that. So fine to comment on improving. Adjectives might be good, solid, pleased to recommend. And the anecdotes are really important here, elaborating on the strengths that you do see. I like to kind of put myself in the mindset. Often I would kind of talk to the student and think about what are their goals. Often these students are applying very broadly. They got pass in medicine and pass in a lot of things, and they're applying very broadly to small family medicine or internal medicine residency programs, community residency programs across the country that might be actually pretty pleased to have a University of Washington student who'd had the education of our institution, even if they'd had some challenges. So I just sort of think about, like, what would that program director is going to know they only got a pass in internal medicine. What's going to make them feel good that they can work with this person? And so this is not, I couldn't find I think I lost some of my old letter drafts. And so I'll let you read this and tell me what you think about this. This is an excerpt from a letter written by John Sheffield for a student who had struggled in the medicine clerkship. What do you notice about this letter?
So the sentence, his formal communication skills were good, just makes my heart drop, as if this was an applicant, it'd be like, oh no, formal communication skills were good is not, like, it's probably not a signal that this is the best candidate ever.
Yeah, you wouldn't say that about another student. I'm just reading the chat. James said really specific positive attributes and highlighting how patients felt about him. Catherine Bowles said emphasizes students' strength and provides context for eventual grade. And that bit is helpful to program directors. And you might, this is John Sheffield, who's a clerkship site director, and he knows that, but you could get that information from the office if you needed it. And then a lot of good and level that is expected. So, and I'm pretty sure this student matched, because we match people. So the letter worked, right? All right. Right, and then because I don't actually routinely say I like that comment, James. The comment at the end, John is saying, like, pick up the phone and give me a call and I'll tell you more. Like, right, I'll tell you the real story. I'll advocate for him. So I think that's actually really good. I mean, like, people could call me. Once somebody did call me early in my career about a letter that was actually kind of confusing, and now I know, like, not to do what I did in that letter. And so people can call you, whether you say you can call me or not, but I think that's really helpful. Great. So the fourth step in writing a letter of recommendation is double checking for bias. And I'm actually not going to cover that right now because I have a separate section on that. I wanted to briefly talk about letters for colleagues, because you want to check those for bias too, for sure. So we were talking about this a little bit in the beginning. Letters that you might write for colleagues are promotions, awards, a reference letter for a resident starting a job. It's really pretty much the same as for learners. It can be a little bit shorter because you may not have to do the same kind of anecdotes. It's really helpful to figure out what's the criteria. So awards should have criteria, right? Positions should have criteria. Sometimes it's somewhat obvious, and even if it's not written, if somebody's applying for a job as a primary care doc, then you're going to want to talk about how they're an amazing primary care doc and they're excellent clinical care and that they work really well as a member of a team. And if they're applying to be a leader of an institution, then you're mostly going to talk about their leadership qualities, right? So some of it's is not too complicated to figure out. When Shom asked me to give this talk, he wanted me to cover writing your own letter of recommendation. And so I don't know, Shom, if you've been asked a lot to write your own letter of recommendation. I have, maybe only once. I honestly feel like asking somebody to draft their own letter of recommendation is really not a best practice. I think it's too hard to do a really good job for yourself. And so you might be stuck in a position where you have to do that, and we can talk about that. But I would, if I do not have time to write a letter, I will say no. If I don't know what to say, then I will just ask them, and that can be a quick email conversation or a phone call. But I will actually write the letter myself. Oh, interesting. Somebody asked you to do. Catherine got asked to do one of her residency letters, and then somebody said it wasn't positive enough. Yeah, if you do have to do it, I would then ask another person to give you adjectives, but then that's like so much work. Yeah. Great. Okay, moving on. These are the general principles of avoiding bias in letters when you write a letter for another person. So hopefully some of you are already familiar with this. There's a lot of research at all levels, not just in medicine, but in academia, in the sciences, showing that we use different types of adjectives when we write comments about men as compared to women, and white people as compared to underrepresented minorities in medicine. And as you know, some of these letters we're talking about are really high stakes, right? And so bias in letters, even though it's mostly unconscious, can have a really large impact. So there's a couple of frameworks that have been looked at in the literature. In general, men are described with adjectives that are agentic, taking agency. Men are described as decisive, strong, assertive. Women are described with communal adjectives. They are nurturing, supportive, kind. Men are described with standout adjectives: exceptional, best, outstanding, superb. And women are more likely described with these grindstone adjectives. And I probably don't have to say explicitly, but I will, that we want doctors really with all of these qualities, maybe not every single one of these words, but we want doctors who are assertive and who are caring and kind and who work really hard and are exceptional and the best, right? So we just don't do anybody any favors when we use only one set of words to apply to a particular group. Similar research has been done comparing underrepresented minority students and faculty and white students and faculty, and a really similar kind of dichotomy shows up, specifically that for white individuals and men, we tend to use these more competency related behaviors. We tend to really describe what we saw, and for underrepresented minorities and for women, we tend to talk about their personal attributes. And just kind of diving down even further, and this literature was only about race and not about gender. Not only do we usually use these standout adjectives, but when we say competent for underrepresented minority students, if you even look at the context, because you can use competent in a lot of different ways. You can say they're the most competent medical student ever, but that's usually not how competent is used, unfortunately. And this is from another study, and I kind of already talked about this, that some of these same words that are used more for women and underrepresented minorities are also our lukewarm and red flag words. So this is why this is really important. Any questions about all of those adjectives and sort of how that shakes out? So here's what to do. In your letters, be specific. We talked about this already, right? If you write a letter that is more like the 4th grade teacher, which didn't talk about like how cute Sam was, although he was really cute. It talked about how he was doing in math, right? It was really relatively objective. So you want to talk about observed behaviors. Rather than effort, they worked really hard. What was the impact, right? They did this thing that really advanced patient care. Talk about competencies and accomplishments for all students. And if a student is really caring and compassionate, I will say that. I just will also make sure that I'm talking about their fund of knowledge and their interprofessional skills and all the other things. And then I just don't talk about people's faces, right? I don't talk about they had a smile on their face. I don't talk about how they were pregnant during the rotation. I don't talk about any of that, right? All right. Any questions about the bias content? All right. Just wrapping up, and then it looks like we should have some time for comments. What about letters for yourself? So I just said, don't write a letter for yourself, right? Really try not to write a letter for yourself if it's supposed to be from somebody else. However, I think about a cover letter, like you're applying for a new job, you're applying for some FTE in something, you're applying to be director of your clinic group, there's some award that you're a position that you're self-nominating for, and you have to write a cover letter. That's really a letter of recommendation for yourself, right? And that doesn't actually fit the same criteria because you really can't use the same adjectives about yourself. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about writing a cover letter. So how important is this? I don't know, right? I think it varies widely. I think sometimes they're read and sometimes they are not. Based on some experience that I've had in selection committees, I think the importance might be increasing. A lot of searches, for excellent reasons, are following a longer and very kind of scripted and hopefully objective process where you write a list of qualities that you want in the job. And then, you know, on a recent search committee I was in, you were not supposed to think about your personal experience with this person, even though it was an internal search, but you were supposed to look only at the cover letter and only at the CV and say, on a scale of 1 to 6, how well do they fit all of these criteria? And it was really hard because they didn't know that they were doing that when they wrote those letters, right? And so the person who wrote a concise letter, which would normally be good, I think lost out a little bit. In the end, we actually interviewed all the people that applied, so it didn't actually matter that much, but I think it potentially could. And so I would pay attention to your cover letter if you're applying for something that you really want. So here's, in my mind, the elements of an effective cover letter. Concise but complete. It can be a little bit longer, I think, depending on how complicated the job is. I still would be really careful to edit out stuff that you don't need. You don't want to be recapping your whole CV in there, but it can be more than 1 page, I think. Here's how I like to approach it, and some characteristics of some of the letters that I've seen that are really effective. I think there is more than one way to do this, but one way to think about it is state your case for yourself up front in the first paragraph of the letter. And you really need to think about this to do it well. So dig into the stated criteria for the position. What did they say they are looking for? And then you can read between the lines and you can think about, well, are there things that they don't mention that I know? Like, I know that you need to work with a diverse group of people, so I need to make sure I say that. And I know that you need to do some bedside teaching, so I'm going to talk about that. A lot of letters I've seen talk about, put some focus on, this is the next step for me. And I appreciate the honesty, and it's true, but it, like, whatever position it could be the next step for a lot of people, right? And so that it's the next step for you doesn't necessarily like help me decide. So it's okay to say that, but I just wouldn't spend a lot of time talking about it. And so then the first paragraph is like usually it's a strong statement with a couple of things. Here's the 3 reasons why I'm a good fit for this job. And then there's 3 subsequent short paragraphs that say, here's why I fit this criteria, this and this. And then it's also totally appropriate to, in some circumstances, to kind of speak from the heart, right? You're applying for your mentor's job. You're applying for something, and it was your life's goal to be dean, and now you get the chance. Like, it's okay to speak from the heart as long as you're doing a lot of objective stuff too. And then, just like we do in our letters of recommendation, just in case they aren't going to read the middle, do a restatement at the end. Ask for help. This is so hard. These letters are so hard. I've been paying attention since I was going to do this talk to different, like, people are applying for stuff, and like, it's really hard to do this well. So have a trusted mentor, a friend, your mom, have people look at these letters and get a couple of opinions. So I'm going to give an example, and it's not anonymized because so this is, if some of you know Shobha Stack, who was a hospitalist with us, and now she's just graduated palliative care fellowship. And a couple of years back, she actually applied for a position in the dean's office, which she ended up withdrawing from because she decided that she didn't want the job. But she wrote this really, I did help too, so I like this letter. She wrote this letter that I thought was really, really strong. I will say, and I'm sorry that I have to say this, but this letter was so good that it actually got shared around, and she's seen some sentences from her letter in other letters. So I don't think anybody in this call would plagiarize a sample letter, but I'm just going to be explicit and say, don't use Shobha's words, because you are not Shobha. But I think that the way she structured it and the way she spoke to her qualities, I thought was really good. And this was a relatively prestigious and complicated position, so her letter is a little bit long. I think you could write a shorter letter if you're applying for something different. But her 3 qualities are her ability to bridge science and medicine. Oh, I guess she has 4. Experiences and lessons learned in remediation, proven success in collaborating with a range of stakeholders, and her dedication to teaching and faculty development. And so then her first qualification talks about her story. Here's why she can bridge science and medicine, because she had a PhD in fluid mechanics. And then the second one is going into detail about her work in remediation. And this is stuff that probably was in her CV, but wasn't really, you can't really explain it enough in a CV. And then I skipped the middle, but then her 4th one talks about her teaching and faculty development. And probably this paragraph could be a little shorter, but it tells the story really completely. And then she does talk about being ready for the next challenge, but she also kind of summarizes why she thinks she'd be a good fit. Any questions about writing a letter for yourself? All right. So in summary, in any of these letters, letters of recommendation and cover letters, be generous and specific. Think about your adjectives carefully. Review your letters for potential bias and ask for help when needed, because this whole process can be kind of tricky.